The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Joe Armstrong. We are. I started the broadcast so that we would get rid of that annoying your broadcast will start shortly noise. But we're going to wait for a minute. We've got a lot of people joining right now, just at the top of the hour. So let's hang on for a minute or two and give everybody a chance to get in, and then we'll get started. Okay, let's go ahead and get going. It's a couple minutes after. I think we got most of the people here. So, welcome everyone to the, I have to get this right, the Pure Systems Virtual User Group webinar series. I'm Joe Armstrong, and this is our second in the series that we hope to keep going and have a webinar each month. So if you hopefully joined us last month, was a kickoff session. We had Craig Elliott talking about installations or upgrades to GA4. But this week, or December this month, we have James Nash, who's going to talk to us about HMC Management. So one of the things with Pure Systems, of course, is that we have x86 power, FSMs, HMC, storage, networking. There's a lot of different topics that make up the Pure Systems. And so not every topic that we talk about will be applicable to everybody, of course. So this month is really geared towards the power and HMC type management of things. So hopefully everybody that's here finds some interest in it and learns a few things. To talk with us today, we've got James Nash. James is with our ATS, or Advanced Technical Sales Support Group. James has worked in a lot of different areas. He's based in Coppell, Texas, which I understand is all iced in and nobody's moving there right now. So we're glad that James could do this from his home. He teaches a lot of Power VM workshops. He gives lectures at different technical conferences like the Enterprise 2013 conference. He's very smart and knowledgeable in AIX, VIO servers, IVE and PIV, fiber channel over Ethernet. And recently, James, I think, has started concentrating just on the Pure Systems, Flex and Pure Flex systems. So we're happy to have James here to talk to us about HMC. So with that, James, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Joe. So, we're already deep in the holiday season. Everybody's focusing on getting their last-minute gifts. Maybe the person here on our template is out there shopping. And probably the last thing you're thinking about is stuff in your data center. So today we're going to take a minute and talk about things that you may already have in your data center that you may want to re-gift, if you will. So we're going to talk about how we might use an HMC to manage power compute nodes in our PureFlex environment. I wanted to give a special thanks to some of my ATS colleagues. Certainly Craig Elliott, who spoke last time, is involved in this, but Julie Peak captured a lot of the screenshots I'm going to share today. Bob Schuster's also helped me out, and plenty of my x86 peers have helped out as well. But so I want to make sure I give credit where credit's due as we go through this. Back in August, there was an announcement, and true to form, as IBM often does, it was kind of an important announcement, but you may have missed it. So even if you had pulled up the announcement letter, again on August 6th, you might have missed the details in there. I mean, you look through the announcement letter and it says, selected IBM Flex system and power systems offer new optional features. And then, the at-a-glance section down there talks about a new adapter, talks about a new switch. It doesn't mention HMC, but if you skip forward about 15 pages, down some bullets, after the lawyers get all their credits and everything, there's some notes in there that talk about that we can now HMC or IVM manage power compute nodes in a flex system environment. It gives some of the requirements there, the HMC or IVM or VIO version requirements. But the most important part, at least my thought is the most important part, is that note kind of in the middle of the page there. And it talks about the note's there, but it's a little bit ambiguous. So I mean, it talks about, you know, we can HMC and IVM manage, and really it's kind of one or the other. I guess you could potentially do both on different nodes. And it talks about, you know, in a flex system configuration with power compute nodes and cannot be used in the same configuration with IBM Flex System Manager. So that last part of the sentence is a little bit confusing because it doesn't mean that it has to be all power compute nodes. It does have to contain at least one power compute node to be able to HMC or IVM manage. It doesn't have to be power only. There can be x86 nodes in there. But the key part of this is that it cannot be used if there is an FSM in place. So we're going to go through and talk about how we use the HMC, what we have to do with the FSM so that we can use the HMC, and we'll just talk about a lot of those details. So usually one of the first questions we'll get is, you know, what is the FSM and what am I losing when I take the FSM out? So most of you are aware of the Flex System chassis, you know, with the various compute nodes in it, and you can tell by looking at the picture here where our FSM is. Some of them have, you know, 2 SAS drives on the front, some have no drives on the front, and there's one special one down here that has a SAS drive, and you can't see it, but there's 2 SSDs on top of it. That's our FSM. So it's sitting inside this chassis, and it's managing the compute nodes inside this chassis, and it can manage up to 15 additional chassis, so a total of 16 chassis managed by this single FSM. What it's providing for us are kind of all the basics, a lot of the same functions that the HMC provides. So the first thing is it auto-discovers resources. So as you plug components into the chassis, the FSM sees those components, discovers them, and tries to manage those components. We can do both physical and virtual management, so we can create virtual machines, LPARs, if you will. There's switches and potentially storage inside the chassis. We can discover and manage the switches. We can set alerts, look at the health of the entire chassis and any of the components inside the chassis, so the nodes, the switches, the entire chassis, the CMMs, everything in that chassis is managed by that FSM. And we can do firmware management and microcode management of the compute nodes, of the switches, the storage, and the entire chassis. So when we start looking at this more closely, you know, we'll have to remember that there's 2 different types of FSMs. There's the base model that does everything we just described, and there's also an advanced feature that you can activate that does some additional things within the VM control landscape. So those are the captures, deploys, image management capabilities also included within the FSM. So as we go through this, we have to keep in mind everything that the FSM could be providing. Some people use VM control, and that could be a critical part of what you're doing with FSM today. And when we go to the HMC, you have to recognize that VM control function isn't there. There's other people who have the FSM and aren't using VM control, so it may not be as critical for them. With the HMC, we get the hardware management, and it's going to be of the compute nodes. So we're not going to manage the chassis in any way. We'll be able to do LPAR management, create LPARs, define LPARs, activate LPARs, do things like live partition mobility, firmware microcode updates for the node. The HMC is not going to know anything about the chassis level. It's not going to know anything about the switches. It's not going to know anything about the internal or externally attached storage, the V7000, for instance. And I showed a picture here of an old C06. There are specific models of the HMC that are required to manage power compute nodes from a flex system. So the C06 happens to be one of them that is not supported, so we'll talk about the requirements more here in a moment. So a table to kind of show the features and functions, comparing what we have with the HMC versus the FSM. It's very similar to creating LPARs and doing things like live partition mobility, activating LPARs, doing DLPAR changes, things like that. What the FSM provides that the HMC doesn't are things like chassis management, storage and network control, and VM control. So we'll talk about ways that we might get some of that function back, how we would do it in an HMC environment. We'd have to do things manually or through different tools, but it's not going to be integrated into the HMC. So I kind of divided the task of going from FSM managed to HMC managed into two high-level steps. One being a demolition step, basically taking the environment, the FSM that you have now, cleaning it up, releasing things so that we can use the HMC to manage it. And then the second part is basically building from scratch and taking the HMC, discovering the nodes, discovering the resources, and using the HMC to work with things. So obviously, if you have an FSM today and you're replacing it with an HMC, you do both the steps. If you just bought a new Flex system and you didn't buy an FSM and you're planning on using an HMC, obviously you can skip the demolition step because there is nothing to clean up out of the box. You can just start fresh with the second step, building from scratch. So there is a new tech note, and I included a link to the tech note in the appendix of the presentation. And the title of this tech note, Supported Management Consoles for Flex Power Nodes, is also a little bit misleading. This tech doc is actually chock full of most of the details that you're going to need to move from an FSM managed environment to an HMC managed environment. It's complete with things like the requirements here that we show, which types of LPARs require which types of management consoles. If we have IBMI, you have to have some type of management console, either IBM, HMC, or FSM. Things like that. There's also links down there at the bottom for the announcement letter that I showed earlier. If we scroll further down, there is a full list of requirements there. We show the HMC versions that are required. We show the firmware level requirements. We do see that the new HMC 778 code is not yet supported. So it does have to be 777 Service Pack 2 or higher, and higher can't be 778 just yet. There are plans to add 778 eventually. We can do dual management with two HMCs. There is no dual management with an HMC and an FSM, so it's either or. You're not going to do FSM and HMC at the same time. FSM can't manage a chassis that contains any HMC managed power nodes. So once we go to this HMC management, we more or less need to take the FSM out of the picture. That means we're not managing other things like the switch, the chassis, the x86 nodes with FSM. We more or less need to take the FSM completely out of that picture. Converting from FSM managed to HMC managed is supported. Going backwards, though, going from the HMC back to the FSM doesn't have an official support path. Basically, their answer to that is you need to wipe NVRAM, wipe the FSP configuration, so all of the LPARs on the nodes, and basically start from factory defaults if you want to go from HMC managed to FSM managed. And then down there at the bottom, they give some more detailed steps on converting from FSM managed to HMC managed. That first step we're going to talk more about. Actually, we're going to talk about all the steps. But that first step is a link to an Info Center page that is just a generic page on how to unmanage or remove a chassis from the control of an FSM. So they're making some big assumptions there, and they actually recommend some steps in there that we're actually going to skip. But we'll go through and we'll talk about all of the steps. The prerequisites, as we saw in the announcement letter and we also saw in that tech note, the HMC model, machine type 7042 CR6 or CR7. We can't use that old C06 that I showed the picture of earlier. It does have to be HMC 777 Service Pack 2 or later Service Pack, not 778 today. Fairly recent firmware levels. The 773.033 or higher is recommended. Always worth a look going out there to see if you're at the latest firmware levels or not. And then we're going to go through these steps to move from an FSM managed environment to an HMC managed environment. And the whole idea here is that we're going to preserve everything on that node. So we're going to keep the LPARs. They're going to change their management consoles, so they're no longer going to know about the FSM. They're no longer going to be able to use things like VM control. But the LPARs will still be there. They'll still be active and running on the destination side when we get to our HMC managed environment. And then that note there at the bottom is what we just talked about earlier on the previous chart, saying that while we can move from FSM to HMC, we're not going to do the reverse. So going from HMC managed back to FSM managed, the recommendation from support is that you restore to factory defaults through ASMI and then basically start from scratch. So we're going to go through and talk about each one of these steps, unmanaging the chassis, removing the FSM completely, and then going to the HMC and discovering our power nodes and managing the power compute nodes. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to understand the IP address that's on our FSPs in our power compute nodes. So if you know the IP address of the CMM, or you can log into the FSM and find the IP address of the CMM, you can go to HTTPS // IP address of your CMM. You can log into the CMM as user ID in this case, or some type of privileged user. We're going to take a look around. So we see a view, the graphical overlay there of the chassis, what we have in it, and we can select under chassis management component IP configuration. From there, we can get a listing of the IP address, so we'll see the various nodes inside the chassis, and we can click the appropriate link to view the IP address for that node. In this case, node 2 is a P260. It has an IP address shown there, so I can take that IP address and I can verify that my HMC can actually talk to this IP address. So that's kind of a critical part to be able to communicate between the HMC and the FSM. I'm sorry, HMC and the FSP, not FSM. So while we're in here, while we're in the CMM, there's another thing we should probably check. This isn't documented in the steps, but it's something we ran into going through this. If we look at the CMM, the management module, under user accounts, we want to verify that we're not using the FSM or some type of external LDAP server, some type of other user registry, if you will. So we can go under management module, user accounts, click the global login settings, and here we just want to verify that we have some form of local authentication. So by default, it will say local authentication only. But if you come into your FSM and you've decided you're going to use LDAP instead, and you're going to authenticate against some LDAP server, you might have something like external authentication server only. If that's selected, we're going to have problems authenticating with the FSP when we go to discover the node from the HMC. So actually any of these options will work except the second option, the external authentication server only. That option will never work. But if you do local authentication only, or local first, or even external first with then local, any one of those other three will work. Just don't select the external only. So then we're going to go to the HMC, and we want to verify that the HMC can communicate with the FSP of our power compute nodes. We're logged in. We go under HMC management, or you could obviously SSH into the HMC and do this. We can select the test network connectivity link there on the right, and we type in the IP address that we found from the CMM. Again, this is the IP address of the FSP of my P260. So I enter my IP address, I select ping, and I see that zero packet loss, everything looks good. So my HMC is able to communicate with the FSM. So now we're kind of ready to go through and go ahead and unmanage the components inside the chassis, unmanage the entire chassis, the node, the LPARs, and the operating system endpoints. So trying to look at this, I was trying to come up with a good chart to show what we're actually doing here. So I mean, part of you may feel like you're taking unnecessary steps to clean up the FSM. If you're going to pull the FSM out and not use it, why do you care if you clean up the FSM? But you have to remember, changes you make within the FSM in turn make changes to NVRAM and other places within the chassis, within the CMM, and that trickles down and makes changes to the nodes, and in turn stores information in the FSP. That FSP feeds information into the LPAR definitions. Things like RMC pull information about, who my management console is from files that get updated from the HMC that's stored within the FSP. And ultimately, it trickles all the way down to the operating system, and the operating system ultimately knows who its management console is based on the information we have here within the FSM database. And it just kind of trickles down, if you will, from FSM to chassis to node to virtual server to your OS in the end. So we're going to go through and clean up that database, but it's also going to push information out to the chassis and to the nodes so that our LPARs will more or less forget about the FSM. So we're here within the FSM. We're under our Managed Power System Resources screen. This is the screen that looks kind of similar to the HMC. You see I have a P260 and a P460 here, and I have 9 LPARs, 9 or 10 LPARs in here in my P260, and these LPARs are going to be there when we get to the HMC side. So we'll go back to the chassis manager view, and we're going to take a look at the chassis, and we're going to take a look at the resources within the chassis. So from the chassis manager view, we'll select General Actions there on the right, and go down to Resource Explorer. And within Resource Explorer, we want to select all our operating system endpoints. So you're going to click the link there for all operating systems. And here we're going to select everything we have. So in this case, this is all of my LPARs on both the P260 and P460, my OS endpoints, and I'm going to select everything here except the FSM. I don't want to delete the FSM endpoint. It doesn't actually let me remove that even if I tried to. So we're going to select everything except for the FSM. We'll go to Actions and do a remove. And again, if you accidentally select FSM, don't worry, because remove won't be an option in the menu. We'll go ahead and select remove here to get rid of all of the OS managed endpoints. We'll click OK to confirm there, and we'll wait a second as the FSM deletes all of those endpoints. So we have success. We'll click close, and we'll see that all the OSs are gone with the exception of the single FSM endpoint that's still there. We'll click the groups breadcrumb there to get back a menu. And now we want to go to all systems. We've deleted the operating system endpoints. We still have things like virtual servers. We still have the nodes themselves, the physical servers, the managed system, if you will. We'll select all systems, and we don't want to delete the virtual servers. The virtual servers are the LPARs. Our goal here is to keep the LPARs intact. So we're gonna select the search field there, search on server, and we'll see both virtual servers and servers appear in there. And we also have a server system pool in there. And then we'll go ahead and sort by the type, and we want to group together all the servers. So the server, for lack of a better term, are the nodes that are actually inside the chassis. We see we have the virtual servers down at the bottom. The virtual servers are the LPARs, or the VMs. So we're going to delete the server endpoints. We're going to leave the virtual server endpoints. So we're going to select all of the server objects. Again, we're not going to select the FSM, just like in the OS screen. If you select FSM, it doesn't let you delete it. So we've selected all of our nodes, and again, these are our P260, our P460. We're even going to delete our x86 nodes. We have 3 x86 nodes inside this chassis. We're going to delete those nodes as well. So I've selected all 5. I go to Actions, Remove. And again, if I've selected the FSM, it doesn't let me remove. I say yes, I confirm that I want to delete these 5 server objects. I get my OK. And then you can see that I now have a chassis, and the FSM no longer knows about any of the nodes in the chassis or any of the operating systems in the chassis. It just knows about it itself, and it knows about the switches. And in this case, I don't have any storage. But it would also know about the storage if you had a managed V7000. So at this point, we can go ahead and remove the chassis altogether. So you can left-click on the chassis to select it, and then right-click on it, or go down to the Actions menu and do Actions, and then do Remove. and we'll go ahead and remove the entire chassis endpoint. So at this point, you're going to get a message, confirming that you do want to remove it, and then you'll see that the chassis has been removed from the FSM. The graphical view closes now because there is nothing to show, because there is no chassis to show a picture of, because the chassis is gone. And at this point, we've actually unmanaged it. The other important part in these steps, in a step you don't want to skip, is once this is done, you want to shut down the FSM. If you leave that FSM up, it will eventually rediscover nodes. It'll rediscover these endpoints that we've gone through and deleted. So we're going to go to the Administration tab. Under the Home tab, under the Administration sub-tab, we're going to select the link there to shut down the FSM for removal. So shut down for removal. We go ahead and do a shutdown. And it says no chassis are assigned to this FSM, so it can be shut down without interrupting anything. So we do the shutdown, and it says your web connection is going to be lost. So the FSM's down, and at this point the instructions recommend that you go ahead and pull the FSM out of the chassis. That's not a hard requirement. I think that's more of a it makes sense requirement. If you leave the FSM in the chassis, that's fine, but if somebody powers that FSM back up for some reason, accidentally or on purpose, it will start rediscovering things inside that chassis. So it's probably a good idea if you're going with the HMC route and you're not going to try and go back to FSM at all. Once it's powered down, go ahead and pull it out of the chassis. There's no need to have it there, no need to tempt somebody to accidentally turn it back on. So shut it down and remove the FSM. Then we're going to go to the HMC. We'll go ahead and discover the power node. So Julie captured the screenshots here, so we've logged in as JPete, which happened to be a privileged user. It could have been HSC root or some other privileged user. We're going to go under Systems Management, and this is just like everything else you've done prior to this point on the HMC. We go under Servers. We see we have a connection to a server there already that we're already managing. We're going to go under Connections. We're going to add a new managed system. We can type in the IP address of the single FSP if we want to. We actually had the P260 and P460. I wanted to discover both of them at once. So we went ahead and did a range of IP addresses from 197 to 201 there. And we clicked OK. It starts the discovery process. It takes a minute or so. And we see that we find two power nodes, Node 2 and Node 7. That's their DNS names. Both with their respective IPs, and now we need to enter an IP address, a password to authenticate with the FSP. So at this point, it's going to be some type of administrative password. So we don't have the admin user on these power compute nodes, so we have to use the user ID password. That's the only user that exists on the PureFlex compute FSPs. So we go ahead and select the two IP addresses there on the left. We enter the password that was used for user ID. This is the one that we used initially when we logged in and authenticated with the CMM. And we click Continue, and it's going to go ahead and discover those nodes. And we'll see the two IP addresses listed there. It shows no connection initially. Out to the far right, we see connecting, and we wait a minute or so. And eventually, once it's authenticated completely with that local authentication, we see I have an M1 P260, M1 P460, my two power compute nodes. If I select one of the compute nodes there on the left, I see the same listing of LPARs that I had when I was FSM managed. So I didn't lose my LPARs. They're still up and running, except for one of them is not activated. The others are up and running, IBMI, AIX, my virtual I/O server. So with that, I mean, we're more or less done. We've taken an FSM managed P260 and P460 and turned it into an HMC managed P260 and P460. I've taken the FSM out of the equation, and you can see my blank box down here at the bottom left. Physically, I've removed the FSM so somebody is not tempted to power it back on and have it automatically discover things. With that, I think I'm going to turn it up. I'm going to open it up for questions. I took the liberty of posting or commenting on some commonly asked questions or questions I've received over the last couple of weeks. So while you're typing in your questions into the chat window, I'll go ahead and answer some of these. Can I use FSM and HMC simultaneously? I hope I made that clear. The answer to that is no. When using HMC, can the FSM manage x86 servers in the same chassis? Again, the answer is no. So if the FSM is in that chassis, there's no way to control what it auto-discovers. It tries to auto-discover everything in that chassis. So if you put the FSM in, you cannot use an HMC. It's one or the other. Now you could take the x86 nodes to a different chassis that's not managed by the HMC, then you'd be fine. Can the FSM manage non-flex power servers? So we've introduced the ability to take an existing HMC and now manage PureFlex nodes, power PureFlex nodes with the HMC. And some people think, for some reason, because we can do that, we can now take the FSM and manage standalone servers. And answer to that is no. This is the ability to HMC manage. It has nothing to do with the functionality that the FSM has. A lot of people ask this question: does this mean that the FSM is going away? Now that you've introduced HMC management, is FSM dead? The answer to that question is no. It has nothing to do with FSM being dead. It has more to do with giving you another option to manage your power compute nodes. So if you've been using an HMC for the last 10 years, you've tried the FSM, and for whatever reason you didn't like the look and feel, you now have the option to go back to the old interface that you're familiar with. Granted, you're giving up some functionality with the VM control stuff, but you may or may not care about that. But it in no way means that the FSM is going away. Can I have dual HMC management? Yes, you can have two HMCs managing the power compute nodes. They're going to manage over the same IP address, the same FSP connection, and it's more of a primary-secondary function. It's not exactly like we have dual HMC management in the normal power servers because we don't have two FSP ports. We just have the single FSP port, and we're managing via the single FSP ports from two HMCs. Can I use Systems Director? Yes. So once we take the FSM out of the picture, the FSM had the look and feel of Systems Director a little bit, some of the same underlying code. And if you had FSM in the picture, you were not able to use Systems Director to manage any of the operating systems within that chassis. The Systems Director server would be considered the FSM. So once you remove the FSM, you can now use your standalone IBM Systems Director server to discover and manage the LPARs on your power compute nodes. Can I use Power VC? The answer to that is yes. So if you like the functionality within VM Control and you feel like you're losing out by getting rid of the FSM, you do have both Systems Director capabilities that you could use now. So you could in turn get VM Control through Systems Director. Or if you don't like VM Control and like the look and feel of the new Power VC server, you could use either one of these as options to do things like captures and deploys. So while the HMC can't do it, there still are other options on the table. Can some new nodes use IVM and others use the HMC? The answer to that is yes. So because we're discovering from the HMC on a node-by-node basis, you could have one node inside a chassis managed by an HMC. You could have a different node inside the same chassis managed by IVM. There's nothing that is managing the entire chassis as far as HMC or IVM is concerned. So you can coexist. Now, you can't have IVM and HMC managing the same node. It's broken down by a node-by-node basis. Can I move from HMC managed back to FSM managed? The answer to that is it's really tricky. So according to support, they're not providing documentation on how to do that. And basically the steps would be nuke the node or delete all the LPARs on the node, go through the ASMI menus and reset to factory defaults, then put your FSM back in, boot it up, let it auto-discover it, and you basically start from scratch. That's the supported method. There's other people trying to do other ways to go back and forth, but as far as support's concerned, that's the method that they're going to support. So I filled in the questions with the answers, and with that, I think there's my email address. We'll open it up to Joe and see if anybody's awake. Yep.
Yeah, that's good stuff. We have a couple of questions here. You answered some of them when you went through that, and I answered one or two while we were going. So, one of the things about the HMC coming on, I think you're right. People, it was added, right? People said that they have HMC skills. They kind of like the HMC, and there's some things that the FSM, I think, provides as advantages, but maybe people didn't need that. So let's talk about a couple of questions and then go to maybe what are the advantages or disadvantages of one over the other, and talk a little bit more about that.
Sure.
One of the questions that was brought up, though, was, when you finish deleting everything off the FSM and you take, you're done with the FSM, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long before you have to power down or that FSM? Before you have to do the shutdown? Does it auto-discover, every 10 minutes, every 15 minutes, only when you tell it to?
That's a great question. I don't know if I know the answer to that. I know that we did exactly what Ron was saying. We did the steps to delete one day, and we took a break and came back the next day, and then we went forward and tried to discover from the HMC, and we actually logged into ASMI and saw that it thought it had two managers, one FSM and one HMC. So the FSM overnight had actually rediscovered the node and remanaged it. I don't know how frequently it does it. I never took the time to go find out, what process gets called and when. So I would probably not leave it very long. In my experience, I left it overnight and it was too long. But I don't have, the instructions don't give a time frame. They don't say, it's got to be within an hour or something like that.
Okay.
But it's easy to see. If you log into ASMI, you can go under the HMC Management. There's a link for it within there. Let me see if I don't have it up. Let's see if I have. Let me see if I can get into one while we're doing this. Were there other good questions I couldn't answer?
So before we get into the advantages and disadvantages, one of the other questions that Ron had was, what happens if the user ID account has been deleted?
You have to call support, and they have either a CE login or a PE login that they can generate to get in to reset the password. I don't think you can delete the user ID account, but you could certainly not know the password, and that's why they can generate a password and basically unlock it.
Okay. Do you know if there's plans to support HMC 7.7.8 with the power nodes?
I actually asked a product engineer that question yesterday, and they said that want to be PC here. It might be a little while. They're working through some other things, so I think ultimately they want to support it. They didn't give me any type of time frame.
Okay, so not high on the
right.
List.
I'm not trying to be vague, but yeah.
Great.
They basically said
I'm sure
not
there's
today.
a lot of things on the list, right? Lots of things to do, and I know if development has to pick and choose what's the most important, what most people need. So that's one of them. I see you got ASMI here.
Yeah, I'm in ASMI, and I did log in as user ID. And at the time, this PSM 7955, that's my FSM. And so when I had the problem, I actually saw my FSM and I saw my HMC in here. I saw both.
Okay.
And that's how I knew there's something wrong here, because I should not see both. And when you go through the steps and do the delete of the virtual servers, you do the delete of the nodes. I'm sorry, not the virtual servers, the physical servers, the managed systems. This PSM entry should go away. And so if nothing's managing it, it'll say, it won't even show this line at all. Obviously, if the HMC is managing it, you'll see a different model machine type there, and it says HMC in there. So that's the way to know whether or not you need to go through the steps and do the delete again, I guess. I mean, so if you waited too long and like Ron was saying, you're not sure if you're good to go or not, just come back here and look. And if you don't have the ID, call support. They can generate a CE login. I don't know if they'll give you the CE login or if they'll have to dispatch a a CE or not, but somebody has a way to unlock it.
Okay. So, you talked a little bit at the beginning about the differences between the HMC and the FSM, and obviously
Yep.
the FSM, it's the integrated appliance, right? We manage,
Yep.
Besides the power nodes, the switches and storage, and integrated storage, and of course the X nodes if you want. So, but there's some things, other than that maybe the HMC and the FSM do differently just for power nodes. What do you think are the strong advantages and disadvantages?
To me, the VM control is kind of the tipping point. So if somebody's strongly invested in getting the captures, deploys working through VM control, and they like that functionality, and they're doing things, maybe they built on top of that, and they've used something like Smart Cloud Entry to integrate with the FSM. It makes it harder to unravel the FSM and pull it out. Because to replace that, to get Smart Cloud Entry working with system, standalone systems director or Power VC is obviously going to be a little bit more complicated right now because it's all brand new. So there's probably very few people out there that have actually done that. So to me, VM control is kind of the tipping point. If somebody's saying I'm not using VM control at all and I want to go from FSM to HMC, it's a lot easier because it's more or less apples to apples at that point. In terms of x86 nodes, a lot of people say, well, hey, wouldn't it be nice if I could use it for my x86 nodes? And the answer to that is, on the x86 side, there's a lot of people just use vCenter instead of the FSM. So you can take away the FSM and go to the HMC, and our x86 guys still have vCenter the way that they're using it today. So it impacts them less. The other part, kind of tied into the VM control piece that we just mentioned, is managing the storage and the switches. So either you're going to turn over control of those switches to your network and storage teams and say manage them like you manage the other switches and the other storage, or you're going to have to find something like, again, Systems Director or Power VC to help with that. So I don't know the best. It's a good question, Joe. I don't know the best way to answer that. Aside from, I think it depends on what you're looking to do and how you're looking to do it. It's very flexible. It's just another option that we have. It doesn't necessarily say one option is better than the other. Right.
In my mind, it's really how do you manage, if you have x86 nodes, how do you want to manage those nodes, right? Do you use vCenter? Do you want to keep using vCenter? And do you have HMC skills that you want to keep using? If those aren't strong, then really I think the FSM provides a really nice integrated, right? Because that's what it's for. It's an integrated management, and it manages the entire Flex system. So if somebody was going to purchase a new system, and I think this is what happens a lot, at least from me and from my colleagues, it's I'm getting a new system. Should I put an FSM in it or not? And it's really a conversation about, okay, what are you using today? What are your skills? And are you open to, something different, or do you need to keep those skills, right? And how do you want to manage storage and networking and that kind of thing, assuming there is storage, integrated storage as well. So
that's a good point, Joe. I mean, it really does boil down to, there's a lot of people, if they're brand new, if they've never seen an HMC before, the FSM is a lot easier to take. They'll embrace it a lot more quickly. If they've been using an HMC for 10 years, while there's certain screens within the FSM that look vaguely familiar, almost like the HMC, there's still a lot of new terms like operating system endpoints and switch and storage things that they're probably not familiar with. So you're right.
Yep, and there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot more to the FSM. So if you have an FSM there, just getting around in it, there's more places to go. So you want to be more familiar with, what you're doing there. And I think your point about something like VM control, you get all that with the FSM. You don't have to set it up separately. It's very nice that way.
Right. No, that makes sense.
So
let me see what this was. This one, did Dennis?
I think we covered all
okay.
those. The one from Dennis was really what our discussion just now was.
Okay.
So I think we've covered all the questions that were typed in. James, so I guess that's it. I want to thank you very much for coming on here and doing this, and just for everybody that's out there. First of all, the presentation that James provided here is out on the wiki. If you didn't hear, we have a new Pure Bug wiki out there. If you've gotten any invites or messages from me, it'll be somewhere in that message. So otherwise, you can look at www.tinyurl.com/IBM Pure VUG, Pure Bug. So, so the presentation is out there, and then when this is all done, I'll put the replay out there as well. And appreciate everybody getting on. And James, thank you again. I'm sure we'll have you back for other sessions as well. So thank you, and I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas. The next session will be sometime in January.
Thanks, Joe.
All right. That will be it then.